Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 119, Meno 88c to D. It's not yet clear where this argument is going. The hypothesis was, if virtue is teachable, then it is knowledge, or a type of knowledge. I don't think Meno is particularly fussy about that. We also have to remember that what I'm saying is knowledge is in Greek episteme, which is knowledge and understanding together. And certainly teachers don't always teach a pupil understanding. They can teach facts, but facts are not understanding and usually are not knowledge either. Meno also agrees that virtue is a good thing, and that good things are beneficial, and then that all the good things such as health, wealth, strength are actually only beneficial when they occur with phronesis, and they are harmful when there is no phronesis accompanying them or guiding them. Socrates then moves on to the virtues, basically. Sophia, dikaiosune, Andrea, in other words, expertise, wisdom, justice, courage, and sound-mindedness. And again, these turn out to be beneficial only when phronesis is guiding them, and they're actually harmful when phronesis is absent. Clearly, phronesis is an important concept in this argument, so it might be worth talking about it a little bit, not too much. The phren or phrenes is or are a part or parts of the body where the mind resides. There's some debate over where this is in the body. The Liddell Scott Jones Greek lexicon is very old, and it still refers only to the diaphragm. While there are texts which support this view, for example in Aristotle and Hippocrates, there is another theory where the phrenes are the lungs, and the heart, being the hottest place in the body, boils the blood. The vapors from the blood enter the lungs from below, and air from outside also enters the lungs, and the air mixes with the vapors from the blood, and that causes the soul. This theory is particularly associated with the Stoics, but the Stoics are dependent on medical theories, and there may already have been physicians in Plato's time who had this theory. It doesn't really matter for us. What does matter is that phronesis is the activity of this area of the body where thinking and emoting take place. The suffix cis is added to a verbal stem to create a word which denotes an activity. In this case, phronesis is the activity of the phren, or the phrenes. But it comes to be associated with virtue as a whole. Arete, manliness, then excellence or virtue, can be explained as phronesis, which is the activity of the intelligent part of the body, and a person with phronesis is phronimos, and interestingly, one of the cardinal virtues, in other words, one of the aspects of phronesis is sophrosine, which is the characteristic of having a sound phren or phrenes. Thus, a virtuous man is considered to have a healthy soul. Cicero popularized Greek philosophy in Latin, and he had to translate various Greek philosophical terms. And phronesis he translated as prudentia, and therefore we translate phronesis as prudence. The problem is that prudence in English is very diluted and simply means someone who is cautious. But prudentia comes from providentia, which means seeing beforehand, and therefore being able to do the right thing. If someone sees beforehand all the possibilities, then he has a chance to choose correctly. Essentially, the prudent person and the Greek phronimos would be the same person and they would behave in the same way, but prudence doesn't literally translate phronesis. And now back to the argument. E ara arete tonente psycheti estin, kai anankaion auto felimo enai, phronesin auto de enai, epide per pantatatatem psychen autamen kathauta, ute ophelema ute blavera estin, proskeno meneste phronesios phrosunes, blaveratica ophelema gignetai. If then virtue is something of the things in the soul, and it is necessary for it to be beneficial, then it must be phronesis, since all things, according to the soul, are in themselves neither beneficial nor harmful. But when prudence or imprudence is added, they become harmful and beneficial. When talking to Meno, the Greek is suitably imprecise. It isn't the case that if you add phronesis or its opposite, that all the things of the soul become harmful and beneficial. They become harmful or beneficial. Another problem is that, according to this argument, all the cardinal virtues and every other aspect of virtue become neither good nor bad in themselves, and the question would then be asked by anybody sane, why are they virtues? Virtues should necessarily be good. Strictly speaking, they are characteristics of people who are good in various ways. For example, a brave man has bravery. Meno has already agreed that the virtues are good and that all good things are beneficial, but then he allows this notion that if there is no phronesis, they are actually harmful. Socrates clearly wanted Meno to react, to say that the argument is incorrect, but Meno happily goes along with anything Socrates says. If we are to agree that arete is phronesis, prudence, then the cardinal virtues are aspects of phronesis, and they are as beneficial as phronesis, but in a more specific way. Phronesis is the most general way. We once again see Meno's inability to abstract. It is not that we add phronesis to cardinal virtues. What is the case is that cardinal virtues are types of phronesis. They are phronesis qualified in a certain way. One of the difficulties in a Platonic dialogue, or we may say one of the dialectical exercises in a Platonic dialogue, is to understand not only the argument, but how the interlocutor of Socrates understands what is being said and why Socrates is saying what he says. This isn't Socrates' own view. It's somehow to manipulate the interlocutor into thinking in a better way, believe it or not. And of course, Plato didn't write the dialogue for Meno's benefit. He wrote it for the reader's benefit. And we are supposed to come to our own conclusions based on what is said and dramatized in the dialogue. We shouldn't assume, as many people do, that any stupidity said in the dialogue must be Plato's view or Socrates' view, we should understand that Socrates says what he says for the benefit of his interlocutor. There's a small point in Greek we should note before carrying on. The opposite of phronesis, prudence, is aphrosune, imprudence. Aphrosune is also the opposite of sophrosune, and it's the opposite of Sophia sometimes, as in Plato's Protagoras. Aphrosune is simply a lack of that place where there is mind, intelligence. Therefore, it is the characteristic of someone unintelligent. Socrates now sums up the argument so far. Kata de touton ton logon, ophelimon geusanten areten, phronesin de tin enai. Emoigedoke. According to this argument, then, virtue being beneficial, it must be some phronesis, a certain phronesis. It seems to me Socrates couldn't have made it any easier for Meno to criticize. This sentence has so much wrong with it, and Meno simply doesn't see anything wrong with it. Meno has no critical faculty whatsoever, and he accepts whatever he's told. In this particular argument, this is the first time that virtue has been mentioned. Socrates has been talking about things pertaining to the soul, but not virtue. He has mentioned various virtues, but not by the name arete, virtue. Meno had agreed that things pertaining to the soul were good, and good things are beneficial, but then he also agreed that they are not beneficial but harmful when there is no phronesis. When there is phronesis, when you add phronesis to these things, then they become beneficial. Nowhere was it said that virtue is beneficial. Could it be that Meno thinks that phronesis itself is beneficial? Well, Socrates hadn't said that phronesis itself is beneficial, simply that when phronesis is present, when it is guiding, then these things pertaining to the soul are themselves beneficial. But clearly, if phronesis is the only thing which makes other things beneficial, it itself should be beneficial. But nowhere has Socrates said this, and he has now treated phronesis as different from virtue, because it's only if virtue is beneficial, then it must be some sort of phronesis, implying that we agree all along that phronesis is virtue.